So no panel, no data, no AI. We've talked a bit about data in kind of previous panel. We're going to focus very much on this right now. I kind of want to start with asking you kind of two questions, or a two-part question. The first part is, when we're talking about data, what exactly are we talking about? Is it patients in clinical trials? Is it drug discovery? Is it anything you can think of? So what exactly do we mean by data? Thomas, do you want to start it off?
Well, my first reaction would be, we're talking about the availability of data. And it could be very different forms of data, but I think we all share the common conviction that availability of data is a key factor to drive innovation, to drive efficiency, and to make our healthcare better. And I think we start with routine data, bringing data and health records, but for sure we're also talking about omics data and more complicated data, where the challenges about structuring and all this are getting quite more complicated. I'll leave it for that very shortly.
Okay. Pamela, what would you answer the question?
So I think the scientist in me says it depends on the question. When I'm a trialist, and if I'm designing a trial that's asking a research question, the data we collect are the data to answer the research question. And I don't think AI is any different. We need to define the use case for whatever tool it is that we want to develop, and then work out what's the data we need, or the types of data sets we need to feed into that. But I think the point that made by Thomas is absolutely correct. Our biggest challenge is, once we know what data we need, where is it? Because it's hidden in all sorts of different institutions, research groups, healthcare, and then how accessible is it, and then how good is it? Is it complete? Is it been validated? So the short answer to your question is depends on the question. But I completely agree with Thomas. There's a much bigger question about the availability and accessibility and accuracy of the data that's there.
The 3 A's. Kerry, what would you?
I'll answer it from the perspective of an NHS data provider. So I think we're talking about, certainly from my perspective, electronic patient record data. So that is across multiple care settings, and it's linked. So it needs to be around primary care data, secondary care data. We need to be looking at the deep, detailed data that often sits within hospital systems and rarely sees the light of day. That's absolutely key for AI development. It needs to be available in near real time. And we need to be thinking about the multimodal data that a lot of the quick wins are centered on at the moment. So diagnostic imaging, digital pathology, the omics, increasingly, per the previous speaker, sensors, wearables. How can we start to incorporate those? And then how can we also bring in the results of clinical trials and other research and link that to those existing records and follow those patients through? But I think, going around and around Pam's point, which I think is a fantastic one, it also involves context. So we have to understand what that data means if we are going to be able to deliver AI and AI outputs that are trustworthy and are not entrenching bias.
Sandra.
So I would just add some of my work is in the uses of AI in drug discovery and development. And I think in that area, you need a plethora of different types of data, right? Genetic data, clinical data, patient data, pharmaceutical data, which is difficult to share as well, scientific data, real world data. So all of those, which are very disparate in disparate areas, you need to figure out how to best combine them to make the AI successful in drug discovery and development.
Fred?
Well, wonderful. It's very exciting to be here because, I come from the drug discovery perspective as well. And, it's actually really great to be part of a discussion of data more broadly in healthcare. And yeah, I'm kind of fizzing with ideas as a result of these conversations. But let's see. I feel like there's been a really massive change, right? So the history of machine learning in drug discovery, or QSAR as it used to be called a million years ago, is all to do with a table of numbers associated with a property of a table of molecules, right? So very simple tabular kind of data. And I think the exciting thing that's happening around us is that thanks to multimodal transformers, you can just broaden what you count as data suddenly you're no longer bound to just a table of numbers. No, as other panelists have mentioned, you can start leaning into omics data and histopath data and image data and patient records and the whole slew of different kinds of data modalities. And I think that's been an incredibly exciting transformation in the way that data can be brought to bear in drug discovery, and that's something we're excited to be working on at Iambic.
Very good. I think, we all mentioned kind of depends on the question, different types of data, depends on what you want to do it with. But I think before we get into the idea of, or do we share it or do we access it, is there a question around ownership of data, in the sense that who gives it the right for the data to be used? If you're a patient, because I don't know, in Germany, who owns the data? Is it going to be the lender? Is it going to be the federal ministry? In the UK, is it the NHS? Is it the patient? Is that kind of an issue in terms of data availability, in a sense that you've got data, the data is available, it is there somewhere, but it is not accessible, as it were. So is that kind of the first question we need to ask ourselves, that who owns that data and who can we ask, I guess, consent to be using that data to do everything that we need to do? Thomas, do you want to kick us off?
You're not going to like my answer because it depends on the data.
Okay, but that's interesting in itself.
But yes, there is data that belongs to the patient. Yes, there is data, and this is an important aspect that belongs to a public health system. We have a solidarity-based financed system, and there is data that belongs to the system, and the system has the right to use the data. And this, we really apply this right of the public health system through many laws that we launched over the last years by enabling all healthcare providers, all sickness funds to use data also without consent. There are exceptions, but so the answer is yes. And there is for sure private data that belongs to industry. But well, I can tell you, I'm one of these countries who belong to the or who will have to follow up the restrictions or the possibilities of the European health data space. And then this discussion is going to be much more interesting over the next years, because then data has to be stored much more in a much more broader way than it is today.
Yeah, I think the it depends answer is true, but it kind of depends a little bit on whether you're looking at it from an emotive, an academic, or a regulatory perspective. In work that we did around the use of data for machine learning and AI in pediatric oncology, we asked the patient advocates, the parents, their perspective on this. And in their view, the data is their child's data. They own it. However, they're completely happy to share it, and they want it to benefit the next generation of patients. So there is a willingness to share data. Where it gets complicated is, but how are you using it, and are you going to keep me informed about that? So there's that whole journey about transparency of what the data is being used for. But then we have this overlay of the regulatory, informed consent, reconsent, consent at the age of majority, which is different in different countries, which makes it very complicated. And under GDPR, we even have this complexity of the right to be forgotten, so take your data back out again. So we have to work within the regulatory framework, and that's where the it depends is really frustrating, because then it depends on the country, how they've interpreted the data regulations, the institution and how they've interpreted their national regulations, and then how the individual is willing to take on the responsibility of informed consent if they don't really understand what it's all going to be used for. So it's a really complex area in terms of data ownership. But I think we have to start with the patients and their willingness for how the data is going to be used.
Yeah, similarly for us, we've worked quite extensively with patients, public and also healthcare professionals around how we should use this data, whether we should exclude certain data types, what sort of models we should use to be able to take the data. Consent is one, but it is not the only one. Most of the time, and I suspect others here will be very familiar with this, most people are saying just get on with it. We have worked through a lot of models. We talked a lot about consent. The concern, particularly in the context of AI, is that that tends to exclude some of the most vulnerable people that exist in society and those who are likely to most benefit from some of these innovations. And so we would probably favour, if you like, again, slightly difficult answer, not thinking so much about ownership, that's a bit of a red herring, but thinking about controllership, who has the right to control, and what needs to be in place from a patient and public perspective for us to be able to undertake the delivery of data services to commercial, academic and third parties at scale without needing to come back every time to seek permission either from patients or from organisations.
And I would say also that this is an increasingly important question, especially as it's key to be able to do medical research across countries as well. And because regulations differ across countries, and especially I think that's especially important for example, rare diseases, or especially the move towards precision medicine, you want more and more data. And so if you can get it from different countries to pool that data together, I think that's key. For example, I'm based in the US, and in the US, when you go to a doctor, you agree for that data to be used, the clinical data to be used for research as well. And I know that's different from how it is in other countries. So I think trying to figure out how to make those more harmonious across nations would be important.
Fred, do you have anything to add, or in terms of ownership, was it slightly different from your perspective?
Well, yeah, exactly. Coming from the sort of more data consumer end of this, I feel like I have a question. Am I allowed to ask a question?
You're more than welcome to ask a question.
Audience. No, it's not really to the audience. It's a question for you, Pam. I'm interested by this point you raised about GDPR implying the right to be forgotten. But you imagine what happens. You're gonna make some huge multimodal transform. You're gonna spend $10 million training the thing, or $100 million training the thing, and then you're, in principle, obliged to have to retrain it because one person wants to withdraw their data. Presumably, there are frameworks for anonymizing data such that that isn't what happens in practice. Otherwise, this is all impossible, right? Is that how you see it?
I completely agree with you. I mean, it's a complexity of different laws with unintended consequences. So
Yeah.
the bringing in this right to be forgotten has nothing to do with healthcare research.
Right.
I think, if I remember rightly, it was to do with Facebook that changed the law. And so, as I work in the arena of clinical trials, where there's an obligation to keep data, particularly safety data, but then when if we try and collaborate with the US, we have to apply GDPR without the public utility exemption. We have to say that they can take their data out of the clinical trial database if there's a safety issue, which is completely contradictory. And I've raised this with government ministers to say, you've got contradictory laws here, and it's entirely unintended consequences. So I don't say it's something that is correct, but we're working with a framework which allows it. If it's completely anonymized data, it's different. But of course, in most healthcare research, it's pseudo-anonymized or it's linked data. And that's where you run into those problems. If it's completely anonymized, then
there's no...
all bets are off. It's okay.
Yeah, very good. Thank you.
I mean, I wanted to ask us a question to basically highlight the difficulty we're all having, because we're all talking about data, so it's kind of there, available, easy to use, and it's just a matter of putting it into the AI and getting the right output. But quite clearly, there's regulation, there's different types of access, different type of availability, the need for the right framework and governance, which is kind of key, basically, to start with, and then you can move into the, let's call it the AI bit of things. So let's maybe discuss in terms of, okay, let's just say, you know where your data is coming from, you know the regulation, you know everything that you need to do. It all works more or less fine, can't really go across country, but okay. What should be the thing that you think you should prioritize in terms of creating the best possible data framework? I know the answer is going to be depends, but I guess what does it depend on? In terms of, is it going to be privacy? Is it going to be security? Is it going to be standards? Is it going to be interoperability? Is it going to be sharing across different institutions in the same country or in different countries? Or do you start? Because I'm guessing we've all highlighted how difficult it is even to do everything before you start. So once you get that, or do you start? Fred, do you want to kick us off?
I would kick it off by thinking about utility. I mean, the whole way I think about this, obviously I come from a drug discovery perspective, right? But the way I think about this is that you have patients in clinical trials and being treated, being medically treated, and their experience and journey through that, journey with disease, for example, is producing a whole host of data, and those data can be used in drug discovery to materially improve the chances of people in the future. I mean, the insights from patients' experiences in the clinic can be used to design better molecules, as we just heard on the very, very last discussion on this stage, to improve probability of success in clinical trials, and therefore to elevate the overall efficiency of the entire enterprise of creating medicines. So yeah, I mean, I'm not saying there aren't a million other constraints, but the first thing that I would look to is utility, because I think that ultimately we're all trying to achieve the same thing, right? Which is to deliver better healthcare per unit financial investment.
Sandra, I know you've done a lot of work on the privacy side of things with kind of PETs. Do you think privacy is kind of the thing to focus on depending on what you do, or is it something else? Maybe talk to it a bit more about PETs.
Sure. So I think that's a key issue is how do you share this data, analyze it across institutions, whether those institutions are in the same country or across countries. How do you make it so that different hospitals can share and analyze data together, train models, for example, on data from different pharmaceutical companies while keeping it proprietary. And so I think one thing that can help with that is the development in the last decade or two of privacy enhancing technologies, or PETs. So these are based on advanced statistical and mathematical principles, and there are different ways to keep the data private, so to minimize the risk of privacy leakage, and that also helps with secure collaboration across institutions, and also to comply with different privacy regulations. I think they're still sort of under development, these tools, and there's a lot more work to be done when it comes to making them more user-friendly across different disciplines outside of computer science. And I think that's a key area to focus on, because I think it would unlock a number of different data sources by having them be more private and being able to share them, and pharmaceutical companies being able to share them in a private, privacy-preserving way.
Kerry, from your perspective, what do you start with in terms of the NHS, I guess, or even one hospital?
I think the first thing you do is embed co-production. So you work with your patients, public and healthcare professionals, noting that healthcare professionals can be very influential, sometimes have an outsized influence on the availability and the reusability of these data. And it tends to be them that have the majority of engagements with the patients. But actually what's really important and sometimes still missing is an emphasis on scalability and sustainability. There's real value, of course, in involving domain experts in this world, but actually the most useful people that we've had within our organisation, a secure data environment that we've built up, have been the data scientists and the architects, because they've helped us get it right on the ground. And that means that, I think, to your point earlier on, we have that data there and available. It can be reused for different purposes. The serendipity that often comes in research, where you're doing research for one thing and suddenly you realise something else could be potentially exploiting that, makes it almost an automated process for us to be able to manage it. So sustainability is key. The other thing, if I can just cheekily add one more in, is about being embedded in a health ecosystem, so that we aren't just giving a researcher some data and that's our job done. We are thinking about the life cycle through to initial deployment, regulatory activity and data to support that, and also post-market surveillance, which I think for data-driven innovations, and especially in a world where we're expecting personalised medicine to really take off, we are likely to see more and more of those data-driven innovations and a greater emphasis on post-market surveillance, especially when many of them are deployed within the same healthcare setting.
Yes, Pamela, what about you?
So I think in an ideal world, we wouldn't start from where we are today, because the data that's being collected hasn't been collected for this purpose, and therefore doesn't have all the parameters that we need for how we want to use it. So particularly where you need to have data from lots of different sources, I think one of the priorities I would say would be interoperability, that you can actually use the data sources that are coming from either different institutions, different countries, or different types of data. And one exercise that I think we really need to develop are the common data variables, so that when we are looking at data from different sources, we've worked out what are the must-have and nice-to-have data sets that we can use to bring together to be able to then, for the clever AI technologists, I'm only a clinician, but for the AI technologists to then use that data and mine it to be able to develop the AI tools. So I think the retrofitting the data into some kind of interoperability is going to be really important.
And does that mean that because the way we've collected data is on the right way to collect data for the purposes we want it now, does that mean that there needs to be a change in terms of how, health bodies are organized, kind of hospital surgery, things like that? And what does that mean exactly in terms of, because I did a panel early on where I think in Ireland, they were still, on the digital, trying to put it on the digital side of things, because we were still very much on pen and paper, which obviously is not great in terms of doing AI, but maybe we're a bit more advanced in other country. But if it's not in the right format, in the right way to do things, so what's the thing, what needs to be done in terms of organization across kind of big, monoliths like NHS or other type of.
It's interesting. I was referred to the European health data that's coming through, and that is going to be, well, monolith. I'm not sure if that's even the right word for it. But at least they are trying to address how do we have a harmonised way of looking at data. I think within the UK we have to make sure that we align with that, not necessarily harmonise with that, but align and take the advantage of having a national health service, at least for health data records. Build on some of the fantastic work that's been going on in Kerry's unit, where you do look at how data can be harmonized. I'm sure it's not the right kind of word, but made accessible, collected in a uniform type of way, and then shared across different institutions. The bit that's challenging, I think the health data is actually less challenging than the research data, because research institutions are their own institutions and each academic has their own way of doing things, and trying to bring that thinking of, well, eventually this data will need to be made publicly available and shared, is something that's happening very well in the genomics now. Published genomics, you have to make it publicly available. If we could start thinking about that for all types of research data, including clinical trial data, and being more harmonized about how we collect clinical trial data, how we develop clinical trial databases, the CRFs, that it is a potential to do that for the future, but I think it's a slow burn rather than a revolution.
Thomas, from your perspective.
Well, actually, we are concentrating on three topics to enhance data availability and to break open siloed systems. And the first one is infrastructure and investment, because yes, we need secure processing environments where we can give access to data without sending data around. And PETs, so this privacy enhancing technologies are a good answer, perhaps synthetic data and another forms of privacy enhancing forms of the access to data. So investment is one important issue. The second one is regulation. And by regulation, well, in Germany, yes, we have privacy issues. We have to define who wants to use which kind of data for what kind of purpose. But this helps to give a secure and trustful framework. And regulation also concerns the question of interoperability, because it's quite important to have international standards and we have to enforce them. We have really to foster other IT systems to apply these international standards, and we are trying to do so. And the last and the most important point is change of mindset. We need a culture of data sharing, and we have to convince the stakeholders of the health system to do so. And this means, it was mentioned today in the morning already, it means training, digital health training in the curricula of doctors, but it means also to get patients along this story, and they have to be convinced that they are sharing their data for the good. And I think the better we collect examples from clinicians, from researchers, that data saves lives, I think we can foster this change of mindset.
And that's actually a perfect segue, because I wanted to ask about that training and education, in a sense, in a way that, or do you make sure that your employees, but not only the health employees, but also the patient, kind of understand what the data is being used for. If you're a nurse professional, what kind of output is going to be required. I think that kind of collaboration between health and data science, I think, Pamela, you mentioned, I'm losing my voice, well, that's all right. I'll stop talking in a minute. In terms of, how could you create that in a sense? What are kind of the next step in terms of getting that training for you as professional, making sure that, the data science is not just kind of siloed with kind of the health professional in terms of the data. So you collect the data, but the data science does something else, and there's kind of no collaboration between the two, which I think probably defeats the purpose to some extent. What is kind of the best way, the best framework? I think, Kerry, when we discussed it before, you mentioned kind of productization in a way, in terms of kind of making it as more of a product type of thing. I don't know if I'm saying...
Yeah.
Please go ahead.
So a lot of what we do, a lot of the focus that we have is on translational research and product development. So a huge amount of that is about getting data available to a lot of clinician researchers, actually, as much as other kinds of customer, and being able to show them the data in near real time that the system or new product that they're creating or their new innovation will interact with. And so in that respect, it can be a very useful opportunity to be able to understand the problems that aren't that much of a big deal when you're treating a patient on a one-to-one basis, but actually are a complete nightmare when you are being asked to pull together 5 million chest x-rays with linked clinical data within a month. And so I think what we are looking to try to do, if I had a spare month, I would do this, this would be top of my list, is to try to engage with the customers and a lot of the academics that are working with the data, and come up with a bit of a simple prioritized to-do list around how the NHS could change what it does. Actually, sometimes quite little tweaks to be able to improve the quality of that data over time, and perhaps again support a bit more upskilling within the profession around data hygiene effectively. And it's silly stuff, we have, speaks to the pet piece, but we will see, I'll give you a real life example. We will see in free text pathology and radiology notes, we will see things like, it is the patient's 75th birthday today. Really unhelpful. That's identifiable data, but it isn't necessarily easily picked up by some of the automatic screening programs that we have. So dealing with that's really important. I think the other side of this is it's increasingly difficult when we are dealing with a degree of vendor lock-in in the NHS. So the NHS doesn't necessarily enjoy free access to its data. Contractual deals are made, value for money is really important, and of course what they're thinking about is how do we access these data and make sure they're available for patients for clinicians treating patients. They aren't, again, thinking about the reuse at scale. So we will often get, for example, I can tell you whether a patient is BRCA positive, yes, no, but it's very difficult for me to be able to access the detail that sits underneath the enhanced panel, the information that the clinicians are really keen on. So there are a few different aspects that we need to work on there, whether that's about procurement practices, contracting, or whether that's about the activity and the behaviours of clinicians who are very busy, understandably, on the ground, making sure that they're using patient records for what they are intended for, which is essentially passing information from one clinician to another and providing a record of care. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I mean, it just tells me how complicated it is. Basically,
yes, no,
it's there's a lot of things to consider. There's a lot of different layers. It depends by country, almost sometimes by hospital, in a way that things are done in a different way. You mentioned procurement. It depends where you're getting your products from, in terms of where you can get access to data and things like that. So, I think there might be a way, because of the AI hype of the past 3 years, that data is easily available, and you just need to do the kind of data science bit of things. But I think we're kind of showing in our example that actually it's far more complicated and sophisticated, and there's a lot to be considering. I am aware of the time, and I want to kind of open it up for questions. We have one there, and I can't see because the light is in my face. So I know there's one gentleman there, and if there's anybody else, please raise your hand and my colleagues will find you.
Hi. My name is Farouk Badiaddin. I'm a clinician, I'm a surgeon, work within the NHS. I think we had a lot of talk during this whole day about what we can do with AI and the potential of it changing healthcare. But at the same time, I think we're all aware that there is talk about, at some point, artificial intelligence becoming more intelligent than human beings. I think there's quite a significant talk about that. So in the context of healthcare, when we start submitting this kind of data to AI, are we making a mistake?
I would have loved to say in terms of whether AI is going to be more intelligent than us. I always quote Jeff Hinton, who said that we need radiologists by now 10 years ago, and we still do. So maybe not, but anybody wants to take a stab, Fred?
I'll take an opening attempt at that question. Look, mankind's made a lot of things that are greater than, in some regard, humanity. So, cars go faster than you can move otherwise, right? So that's an example. And AI is just able, it's demonstrably true that there are some tasks where AI is better able to predict things or make decisions about things better than humans. And I think that's okay. I think that, it's not saying that AI is going to be more human than humans. It's just saying it's going to be better at one thing, just like a car's better at moving at a certain velocity than I am. I have no problem with that. I mean, I think that this is all opportunity and development. And so, in the real world, how does this translate, for example, in drug discovery? You're trying to find which molecule you're going to advance to a next stage. You have to predict properties of those molecules to prioritize which ones you're going to make. AI models are better at predicting properties of molecules than people are. And so it simply makes sense to leverage that opportunity and to try and work on efficiency and creating better medicines.
Thomas, yeah.
Well, perhaps I would like to add that we face this in our healthcare system at many different places. I mean, every CT can do things that we can't do. And we trust them because we have the regulation and we see the performance as well. And I think there is no difference to the medical device regulation and to what we have right now established as a framework. And yes, powerful AI might be a challenge for it, but it's the same question. Is it secure? Is it transparent? And can they explain their results? And then we can adjust and we can adapt. So I think it's the same challenge that we're facing for the last 2 decades in our healthcare system.
Sandra.
And I would just add that I think there's a very big complementary role between humans and AI. So right now, even advanced Gen AI models are very good at correlations, right? So what kind of genetic mutation, for example, is correlated with the disease, but it's not so good at understanding why, right? So the causal pathways behind it, which is, even though there's been some advances in that, it's not anywhere close to humans. So I think that's a real place where humans can excel, to say, okay, this is related to that, but why? Because you need that as well to create an effective and safe drug. So I think that exploiting that complementarity is going to be important in having humans and AI working together well.
Yeah.
And I agree, it's not a matter of whether the AI is more intelligent than us, because it can answer questions better than we can and quicker. But I think the question is really, are we going to rely entirely on AI to make clinical decisions without human intervention? And certainly from our surveys with patients, they don't want that. They still trust the human. Even though humans are fallible and we make mistakes, it's a mistake they understand. What at the moment is this black box about AI, and I don't understand how an MRI scanner works, but I trust it. For some reason, I don't understand how AI works, and I have a little bit of mistrust because there really is some part of it at the moment is not intuitive, and maybe that's going to change in the future. I don't see, and maybe it's protection of my own role in life, but I don't see a situation where AI completely changes the clinician's role. There are aspects of being a human interacting with humans with disease that I don't think a machine will ever replace, but we can use machines to make our role easier, faster, and more efficient.
Any more question? Quick one, because we're running out of time. Gentleman in the middle, unless there's somebody else. I can't see, so you... Sorry.
Try to make a quick question to draw to Oxford. Don't you think that sort of current clinical trials, a bit of a study in epistemology, and if AI was to design a clinical trial afresh, what would that be? Because we sort of try to frame it historically as a single drug and measuring single outcome, then sort of extrapolating it to single drug, multiple outcomes, and then collecting maybe everything we can measure, and then maybe going with combinations. But sort of at the molecular level, right, adding compound sometimes downregulates 1,000 things and upregulates another 1,000. So the way we model it is intrinsically so primitive, even though we sort of look at all the parameters, right? It might not be productive. And if AI was to design a new kind of clinical trial, what would it be? And if we were to go combinations first, this is a sub-question, would it be more efficient and more cost-effective?
Somebody has got 1 minute to answer that question. Good luck.
I can give it a stab. I just come back to the point that AI is a tool. It's not going to invent new statistics. It can use the statistics we already have. So you have to put in the question, you know, is it this combination you want to evaluate and you want to work out? I think the previous speaker was talking about effectively stratified medicine. How do you pick the right drug for the right patient? And you can put all those questions in. And I'm sure the AI would very rapidly try all the different statistical models and come up with the final design. But I'm not sure it's going to tell you the answer. It's going to give you some design options, and then you would work out what will be feasible for your patients.
We're going to have a break in 15 seconds so you can carry on that discussion, but I'm afraid we need to go on a break, so I'm going to be told off. So thank you very much to my panelists for joining us.